Let's Not Meet is one of the most frightening subreddits in existence. Users there share their unnerving stories, exploring the very limits of human terror. But what makes Let's Not Meet so captivating is the line is blurred between fiction and reality. Many of these stories are real, and if you're not careful, you might just find that they could happen to you. Here are 5 of the scariest Let's Not Meet stories in existence. He asked for me by name. Posted by Reddit user Ligamentary, this description of a very real creepy encounter continues to terrify its readers. It happened a few years ago. The Redditor was looking after their grandchildren while the parents were out of town. Everything seemed fine at first. The kids were in bed and there was nothing to be afraid of. But often it's at night when the strangest things happen. Around 3 a.m. the Redditor was awoken by a weird rustling sound coming from outside. Looking out of the window, the front lawn was bathed in darkness, but bushes to the side of the garden were clearly moving. Suddenly, someone emerged from the bushes. At first, the Redditor thought it might be a burglar, but then it became clear that the person was a teenaged boy, too young to be casing out places that he could break into. The boy had a bike with him, and so the Redditor decided to just tell him to go home rather than bringing the police into things. Flipping the porch lights on and opening the front door, the Redditor yelled out, "Can I help you?" The boy seemed more surprised than frightened, which in itself was strange. He shouted out, "Yeah, I'm looking for Alyssa." Now, as it turns out, one of the Redditor's grandchildren is a teenage girl going by that name. But as the boy approached the house, it became clear that there was something off about him. In the dim light, he looked older than he should have. Certainly much older than any of Alyssa's friends should have been. In fact, he looked pretty rough around the edges, and more gaunt than athletic. The Redditor responded with a disapproving glare, hoping that it would be enough to let him know that turning up at someone's home at 3 a.m. is completely unacceptable. But instead of being put off, the boy walked closer to the house. The Redditor was thinking at that moment that Alyssa must have invited him over, knowing that her parents were out of town. But as the figure on the lawn approached, the Redditor felt uneasy about the whole thing. There was something unnerving about that boy. At that point, the Redditor told the boy to stay where he was and not to come any closer to the house. He stopped where he was and just stared. The Redditor closed the door and went back inside, waking up Alyssa. Angry about the whole thing, the Redditor began to tell Alyssa that she was in trouble for inviting a young boy over to the house in the middle of the night and that she needed to tell him to leave. Alyssa got out of bed and went to the window looking through the curtains. When she turned around, the color had drained from her face. She asked her grandparent, "Did he know my name?" To which of course they replied, "Yes." That's when Alyssa stepped towards her grandparent in a panicked voice and said, "You have to call the police. I've never seen that guy before in my life." The Redditor immediately called 911, but while on the phone with the emergency operator, the boy outside began walking closer to the house again, as if he was trying to get inside. At that point, the Redditor shouted through the door that there was no one by the name Alyssa living there, to try to make him think that he had the wrong house. That was when the boy grew angry and started yelling, demanding that Alyssa come outside. The boy was unhinged. Just as things were about to escalate, a police car approached nearby with sirens. The boy ran off, but instead of running back through the bushes, he jumped into the passenger seat of a car parked out front. That was when the Redditor realized in horror that the car had no license plates, so it could not be easily identified. The car drove off in the opposite direction, and when the police arrived, the driver and the boy were long gone. The car and its occupants were never found. All the police could advise was that Alyssa take all of her social media details off of the internet. They told Alyssa and her family that similar reports have come in recently. Someone was trying to lure young teenagers out of their houses at night, and the reasons were clearly evil. A frightening experience. Some stories on Let's Not Meet are from Redditors sharing their creepy experiences from long ago. Over time, recollections can become hazy, but there are times when someone posts a terrifying experience that's fresh in their memory. That's the case with Redditor Shark Surday, who posted something unnerving that had happened to them just the previous night. They had been over at a classmate's house working on a group project for university. The project was due the next day, and so they were going to stay up late to get it done on time. The classmate's house sat in the foothills just outside of their town. To reach it, the Redditor had to drive along a secluded and narrow road that weaved through the countryside for several miles. After staying there all evening, the project was finally completed just before midnight. This was when the Redditor decided to head home, back along the narrow road. This time, however, it was dark, and the road felt far more malevolent and dangerous than it had during the day. Driving along the road, the Redditor realized that there were no streetlights to light the way. And so, the only way that the road could be seen was through the Redditor's car headlights. The light from them occasionally lit pieces of the surrounding terrain, casting unnerving shadows as the car moved. To make things even more difficult, the road was also poorly maintained. There were many potholes, and although these were easy to avoid during the daylight, in the pitch black of night they were much more difficult to navigate. More than this, there was no cell phone service and no spare tire, so if the car got a flat due to the road, there would be no way to call for help. They would have to proceed on foot or spend the night in their car. The Redditor drove along the road slowly, trying to avoid anything that might damage the vehicle. The journey back then took much longer than it should have. About 3 miles into the drive, the car rounded a tight corner. On the other side of it, an unnerving sight broke up the monotony of the drive. There was a pickup truck with a camper shell parked on the road. But what made it most frightening was that the truck was parked diagonally across, so that it would be difficult, if not impossible, for another driver to pass by. On each side of the road there was a deep gully, and so it would have been dangerous to even attempt it. If the pickup truck wasn't going to move, then there was no other option but to reverse back along the trail until a pull-off could be found where the car could be turned. The Redditor would have had to drive back to their friend's house. And this is exactly what would have happened, but before reversing, the Redditor put on the car's high beams for a better look at the truck. That was when they saw it. Inside the pickup truck was a man slouched over in the driver's seat. His head was against the steering wheel and it looked as though he might have had an accident. Normally, the Redditor would have tried to help, but looking around at the secluded area bathed in darkness, the entire situation just felt wrong. It was as if the scene had been staged so that the passerby would have to get out of their car. The Redditor had heard stories of people playing dead or even faking injuries on remote roads as a ruse for kidnapping or carjacking. This was not the time to take a risk, and so the Redditor threw their car into reverse and began heading back the way they came. That was when the driver of the pickup truck sprang to life, got out of his vehicle, and started running towards his car. A group of men also appeared from the back of the camper shell. Together, they started gaining on his car. Luckily, a pull-off came into view, and the Redditor reversed as quickly as possible without coming off the road. That gave the driver and the men from the pickup enough time to reach the Redditor driver's side door. They pulled at it, trying to get inside. Panicked, the Redditor then put his foot down on the gas and sped away. The men behind stood on the road as shadowy figures in the night. Once back at their classmate's house, the Redditor called the police, but the pickup truck and its occupants were long gone by the time that they arrived. Pizza Guy Kidnap. Delivery drivers see a lot of strange things during their jobs, especially on a night shift, but what Redditor Enough Pizza Now encountered was truly creepy. This Redditor delivered pizza for a living. One night it was especially busy. There hadn't even been enough time for a bathroom break. At the time, the area had been going through a bad heat wave, so the delivery driver was consuming a lot of water throughout the night as well. This only made things worse, and during one delivery, the driver suddenly needed to go to the bathroom urgently. Luckily, the customer waiting on their pizza was nearby, so the driver felt like they could drop the pizza off and then go for a bathroom break straight away. But it wasn't quite as simple as that. The customer's house was on a quiet street, but as soon as the driver pulled up outside, it was clear something was wrong. The house was bathed in darkness. Not one light was on. It looked as though no one was home or they were asleep. To make things even creepier, even the street light directly next to the house was out. Looking around, the driver could see the street was completely empty. The place was silent. Rather than disturb anyone who might be sleeping inside, the driver double-checked that the address was correct. Using his cell phone, he called the customer's number, and someone picked up, but they sounded out of breath. The voice was hard to understand because of the gasping, and they said something about not being home. That was when the Redditor said that they would just cancel the order, but suddenly the voice became clearer. It was the out-of-breath voice of a woman, probably in her late teens or early 20s. She started saying that she couldn't hear what the driver was saying on the phone, so she switched on her earbuds, and that made things better. The woman said she was running back from her work and didn't have a car, but that she would be home very soon. She then asked the driver to wait for her as she was very hungry. By this point, the driver was desperate for the bathroom, but he decided to hold on and wait. He felt sorry for the woman. While waiting, the urge to go to the toilet became unbearable, and so the driver decided the safest thing to do was to relieve himself by a bush in front of a house and hope that no one saw him. Leaving the car and rushing over to a bush near the house by the front door, he began to relieve himself, when suddenly a hooded figure leapt out from one of the bushes towards him. The man was large and wearing a hoodie, so it was difficult to see what he looked like. Although the driver was scared, the man in the hoodie didn't attack him, but instead ran off down the street, disappearing into the night. That was when the driver noticed a bag was hidden in one of the bushes. Carefully opening it and looking inside with a flashlight from his phone, he recoiled in horror. Inside there was a knife, duct tape, and what looked like pills. In a panic, the driver ran back to his car, got in, and then called the police. The girl who called for the pizza soon arrived, and when the driver explained that there had been a man hiding in her bushes, waiting for her to come home, she was terrified. The police soon appeared, and the driver later received a call from her thanking him. He had saved her life. She had an abusive ex-boyfriend who had clearly been planning to do harm that night. It's possible that if the driver hadn't inadvertently stumbled upon the man's hiding place, that no one may have seen that woman alive ever again. My brother saw a ghost as a kid. The stories on Let's Not Meet rarely include anything supernatural. They usually revolve around frightening events that are just as unsettling, but ones that are grounded very much in the evils that human beings commit. In the story shared by Redditor Florian Zier, the line between supernatural and human malevolence is blurred, at least for a time. Florian Zier's story began when he was 7 years old. At the time, he had a 10-year-old brother. Their father was out of town working, and so the brothers were alone with their mother. The Redditor was used to the mom and the brother getting up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom. The reason for this was that Florian Zier was a light sleeper and could always wake up when this happened. However, for the previous few nights, the brother hadn't been going to the bathroom once it got dark. This was unusual, but Florian Zier only realized the true strangeness of it when finally, in the middle of the night, his brother came into his room and made a confession. He told the Redditor that the reason that he hadn't been going to the bathroom for the last few nights was because anytime he left his room, he saw a tall man in striped clothing standing at the end of the hallway. Whenever the brother would see him, he would just rush back into his bed and hope that the man didn't follow. On that night, however, he really needed to go to the bathroom badly and hoped that his little brother would keep a lookout. Florian Zier was terrified by this story, but tried to persuade himself that it was simply his older brother trying to scare him. There was something about the confession, however. It felt sincere, believable enough that even the idea of walking around their home at night was a terrifying one. Visions of the tall man wearing stripes haunted Florian Zier, but he never saw the figure himself, and it seemed that he was never encountered again. Despite this, Florian Zier became absolutely convinced that the house was haunted. From that day, many years passed. When Florian Zier was 18, he had a conversation with his mom one day while they were driving somewhere. They were reminiscing about the dog they had as a family pet when Florian Zier and his brother were younger. The dog's name was Max, and they started sharing stories about some of the funny things that Max used to do in the home. When their mother suddenly mentioned a night when the cops entered the house, and Max used a noise as cover to sneak into where a large bag of dog food was kept and ate it all, Florian Zier was puzzled. He didn't remember anything about the cops coming to the house. That's when the mother remembered that Florian Zier was too young at the time, and she didn't tell her about the police coming into the house in case it scared her. That's when she told her what happened. One night, Florian Zier's mom woke up and a tall man was staring into her bedroom through the window outside. She screamed, turned on all the lights, and then grabbed her husband's weapon before calling the police. At first, Florian Zier didn't make the connection, but when her mother told her that the man had been wearing a striped top, either she had seen a ghost or that same man had been in the house on numerous occasions, preparing to do only God knows what. The man on the patio. When Redditor Pesfi678 was 9 years old, something truly frightening happened, an experience that to this day still gives them goosebumps. At the time, the Redditor lived in a terraced house. There were 4 houses combined into one building, and each one had its own small patio out back. Beyond this, there was a small road, so passers-by were always close to the houses as they walked. A lot of people in the neighborhood would walk that way to access the other places in the area. For this reason, the Redditor and their family were used to people coming and going from the rear of the house on most days. At that time, the Redditor would return home from school about an hour before their mom would come back in from work. Because the school was only a couple minutes away by foot, the mom thought their child was mature enough to make the journey on their own. That would prove to be a mistake. One day, the Redditor returned home from school. They did the same thing that they did every day. They locked the front door behind them and then checked that the back door was also locked. But despite the house being secured, the idea of being alone at that age, even just for an hour, filled them with dread. After locking the doors, the kid went upstairs to play with their toys in their room. The room itself looked down directly to the patio below at the back of the house. After hearing a strange noise that sounded like a cat, noting that their cat had sadly disappeared months before, the kid rushed downstairs excited, hoping that the pet had finally returned. But what stared back through the glass of the door was not a cat, it was a man. He was tall with his hair drooping down across his eyes, obscuring some of his face. But what he was doing was truly bizarre. He was making high-pitched sounds like that of a cat. And he was eating cigarette stumps that he had found in an ashtray outside, chewing them and letting brown liquid drool over his chin from his mouth. The kid rushed away from the glass and ran back upstairs, back to their room where they called the police. The wait for them to arrive was unbearable, and the Redditor felt that at some point they had actually blacked out from the fear, waking only when the police had finally arrived. When they did appear, the man on the patio was still there, making strange noises and sneaking around. An altercation broke out as the man attacked one of the police officers. He was tased and arrested. But this is when things took an unexpected turn. You see, the man had escaped from a facility where he was being cared for. He'd been there most of his life, but at one time, he had lived in that very same house with his own mother before she died. Years passed and the Redditor never forgot the fear of that situation. It absolutely haunted him. But despite this, the Redditor actually bought the house from their parents and lived there for a long time. One day, however, the fear of the man coming back became a reality. There he was, standing in the garden again. However, this time the Redditor actually approached the man despite the fear that he would be attacked as the police had been years previous. But something remarkable happened. He extended his hand in friendship. When the Redditor opened the door to the house, the man walked inside, sat down on a couch like a child, and turned on the television. He actually started watching cartoons. In a strange twist, the Redditor and the man became friends. All the man had wanted to do was relive his childhood, the happy memories he had when he was a kid. Now, every Sunday, the man, whose name is Tom, comes to the house to watch cartoons with his carers. They say it's the highlight of his week and a real lesson in how sometimes, just sometimes, even the most frightening of circumstances can be something entirely unexpected. Thank you so much for watching, and if you've made it this far, remember to follow me on Twitch and join my Discord. I'm extremely active on both, and I like to interact with you guys live every single day on both. So be sure to join, and I'll see you next video.